morning, Alan Hadley with PhotoNetworks. Thanks for joining me for this next video tutorial on shooting in the fog. As you can tell, we've got lots of fog this morning. We had a storm come through last night, and this morning we have this wonderful fog. What a great time to get out and shoot. Like I've always said, get up early, get out, and get lost, and you'll find some great photographs. So, with that said, let's go shoot. Okay, we finally arrived at our first shot, and as you can see, it's like a pond with some cattails and a tree and so on and so forth. And during normal circumstances, I might not shoot this photograph, but when you add the fog to the equation, what you have is something that is like a big softbox or a diffusion filter that adds a little bit more life to a photograph that you wouldn't normally see. So, with that said, let's shoot this shot.
As you look at the finished images throughout this tutorial, you're going to notice that in some segments there's multiple images. That's because under each one of those situations there may have been additional shots available within that same area. So what I've done is photograph those, edit them, and post them here under each segment. So look at these finished images and let's move on to our next location.
In this particular shot, what we're looking at is the outlines of the trees. It's almost a silhouette, and how the landscape kind of slopes down. The sun is coming in from the upper right hand corner, and it's just starting to poke through the fog. And even though you get out early, you can still get some good shots when the fog is thick, and as the fog thins, you're going to start finding other shots. So it's always good to be out early so that you don't miss anything. A lot of times the fog will burn off pretty quick, so you got to be prepared. So let's shoot this shot and let's look at the finished image.
What you'll notice in these two images is that the color temperature is totally different. What I've done is shot the images under the same conditions, but actually changed my color temperature in post-processing.
Okay, before we get started on this shot, I want to talk to you about safety. Working in this kind of environment, the fog, can be very dangerous, especially if you're shooting from your vehicle or if you're walking or parking on the side of the road. So, a word of warning: be careful, because it is dangerous. And fortunately in this situation, I'm off the road. I'm shooting a roadway or a driveway with some trees, so we're okay. So, all right, on this shot, what we have obviously is a road with some trees, and there's a few things I want to talk to you about on this particular shot. I'm doing something a little different. I'm not just shooting straight with the camera. What I'm doing is I'm using a flash and to kind of fill in the foreground a little bit, and to brighten up these trees in the foreground. But then I'm also shooting at a very slow shutter speed. I'm shooting at about a 60th of a second at 5.6 and 6.3, and what that's going to do is obviously give me a certain level of depth of field. But I'm also shooting with a very wide angle lens too. I'm shooting with about a 17, somewhere between 17 and 30 millimeters, so it's giving me a really wide angle kind of view. And of course, that fill is going to kind of fill these trees in a little bit. So, with that said, let's move on to our next shot.
In the next two finished images, you'll notice one is color and one is black and white. Both images were shot at the same location under the same conditions. I chose to edit one in color and one in black and white because of the content of the image. You will also notice that there is different compositions on the same subject. So, with that said, always keep your mind open to opportunities within the shots that you're working with.
On this shot, we have a pond, a tree, and a fence line. And pay attention to the composition, how the pond is coming into the tree and then the fence line drags you back into the photograph. Just like any other photograph that we shoot, even when we're shooting in the fog, we need to pay attention to our composition and our perspective. It's really, really important. So with that said, let's look at the finished image and move on to our next shot.
In this particular location, we actually had 4 different images that we ended up shooting, and it was as simple as just turning the camera. I never actually had to move very far down the fence line to get different shots from this scenario. So when you walk up to a situation like this, what you want to do is look at every available opportunity that presents itself to you in that scenario. And with that said, let's continue to look at these and move on to our next shot.
Alright, we are set up on our next shot, and pretty typical type of shot that I like to shoot because I live out in the country, so barns are abundant. But it's a great shot for the fog, and I'm doing something a little different on this shot. I'm actually using a graduated ND filter, and sure, I could do this in Lightroom or some other editing program and add a graduated filter to it later, but like I always say, I like to create the image in the camera. So if I need to make a little adjustment whenever I edit, that's fine. But this gives me an idea of what my shot's going to look like before I ever get to editing, and that's what we want to do. We always want to try to create that shot in the camera. So as you can see, and I'll pan a little bit here, this is a pretty good sized field. There's lots of fog. There's some flowers or daisies, dandelions, whatever you want to call them, in the foreground, and you just pay attention to your composition and your perspective, and I think you'll be fine. I'm shooting at 6.3 and 7.1 at about 1/25 of a second, and the finished image will probably be about 1/25 at 7.1. The sun is starting to pop through, so we're getting a little bit more definition, and that's what we want. So let's shoot some more.
I found this composition to be the most pleasing and the one that represented the shot the best to me. But don't pass up an opportunity. The next shot that you'll see was actually across the road from where I was actually shooting the barn. So there's other opportunities available to you in the areas that you're shooting. You just have to pay attention to all the details and find those shots. There's a couple of things that I want to make sure that I point out. The first being safety. As we discussed, it can be a very hazardous shooting situation, so you want to be aware of your surroundings and pay attention to the details. Obviously, you do not want to get yourself in a situation that is going to harm you or damage your equipment. The second thing is to make sure you take a hand towel with you to wipe off your lens, to wipe off your filters, to wipe off your camera, to wipe off your glasses. The point is that in a foggy situation, it's moisture, and it's going to affect you and your equipment, so be prepared for that. The third thing is to always remember your exposure and your perspective. Your point of view, where you're shooting from, is extremely important in any type of situation that you're going to shoot something. Keeping your eyes and your mind open to every opportunity is key to creating beautiful images. With that said, that brings us to the end of this shooting tutorial, and I look forward to our next.